Hey folks, today's episode I've got lined up, we're going to continue with our idea of a more back to basics type episode, right? So in last week's discussion, we were talking about getting started with Hyper-V in 2026. Well, we're going to build on that episode now with, failover clustering with Hyper-V in 2026. So, last week we were talking about standalone hosts. This week we're going to be talking about a cluster of hosts. And regardless of whether you saw last week's episode or not, you're still going to find plenty of value in this week's episode. So again, I've got Eric Siron back for this one. We're going to cover clustering, storage, networking. It's a very broad topic. I think we've got a couple more episodes that we'll probably pull out of this particular topic area over the next month or two. But with that, hope you enjoyed today's episode. Here we go. Hey everyone, it's a new week. That means it's time for another episode of SysAdmin Weekly. This is your podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks working out there in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got my good friend, I've got Eric with me again here today. How's it going, Eric?
I'm good, Andy. How you doing?
Doing good. You got your buddy there. You got your cat with you too.
Yeah.
We should add your cat to the the host list as well because we see them so frequently.
Absolutely. She's trying hard to be famous, aren't you?
There's no way my cats would sit still that long, or my dog for that matter, for the show. But anyway, it's good to have you, my friend, and looking forward to another Hyper-V discussion today. I'm sure you are too. So,
One of my top topics.
I figured it was. You and I have had many a discussion about Hyper-V over coffees and beers over the years, and our episode last week was very much focused on getting started with Hyper-V in 2026, and the whole reason behind that episode and this one is we wanted to kind of bring it back from. We had a lot of episodes where we were very much reacting to things that were happening in the news or in the industry. While important topics, this being a sysadmin focused show, we want to make sure that we're covering technologies and in the trenches type of stuff as well too. So we wanted to bring it back down and start doing some fundamental episodes again. And that's the reason behind these the Hyper-V episodes we've been doing. And we'll get into some other tech topics here in the coming weeks as well too. But today we're going to pivot more from the Hyper-V getting started fundamentals to Hyper-V failover clustering, right? Because I don't know about you, Eric, but this is one of the places where I see a lot of admins new to Hyper-V get tripped up here. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We'll get into it. But before we get to that, we have our usual recurring segment. We'll start with our News React segment. This is the segment of the show where my co-host and I, we choose a tech news headline that caught our eye over the last couple of weeks and we discuss. So selfishly, I will start this week. And I have, it's a quick one. More of just an FYI in case nobody has seen it. And I guess I'm going to leave it with a question mark for everyone, but I saw the news headline the other day that there's a new ban from the FCC on any foreign-made consumer router. Now, I don't know about you, Eric, but I'm not aware of any, domestically built consumer router here in the U.S. because there does not exist one. There's no manufacturer that does that. So big question mark about what that means long-term for the consumer routing space. Now, you, Eric, our audience, we probably don't have to worry about all this because I can take the spare laptop I have over there and turn it into a router if I had to, right? Not a big deal. But for your average consumer, a lot of question marks for me on this one. And here's the other funny thing. If you look at the ban specifically, it bans the sale of net new routers, ones that presumably have improved firmware, hardened firmware, fixes to known security issues that might be present in existing consumer routers. Existing consumer routers can continue to be sold and purchased, allegedly, according to the wording. So, a lot of question marks. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. You folks can check that out. But this is what I'm going to be keeping an eye on in the coming days, because I don't know. This one leaves me with more questions than answers. So anyway, that's my news item. What about you, Eric?
Well, on yours, I saw like 2 days later, Netgear was already approved for as an exception. So what I wonder is if this is just them setting up, well, if you pay us, wink, wink, nod, nod,
Yup.
we can make things happen for you.
Given the
So I
way,
don't,
yup. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, so I don't know how real it even is. And of course, something else that kind of a quiet trend is now almost every ISP will try to get you onto one of their routers.
Yup.
So most home users are probably like, well, I just have the one that my provider gave me. I don't even know what it is.
Yup.
So I don't know how many people are going to feel this other than, yeah, I just don't know. I
Yup.
just don't know. I mean, I was like, I want to come out here and go, well, this is my prediction. I don't really have one because I myself, like, well, so I use a Verizon 5G and they give you a 5G box with a router built in. And like, well, I'm probably going to do, I'm going to come back to this in a minute in a separate topic, but I'm probably going to do something about that. But I don't really feel a pressing need to run out and get me a Netgear or a Linksys or whatever's like. I would have to start research all new again to find out which one I would want. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yep.
how has the industry actually moved on this? I don't know how much pain we're gonna feel. I just don't
Yeah,
know.
it's hard to say. It really is hard to say. But I think the more concerning thing to me is the fact that the U.S. federal government feels the need to meddle in the networking industry, which,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, from a defense point of view, there is some concern about things made in certain countries. I'm not going to call any out, right? But, uh, you know, we have to be realistic about our manufacturing capabilities here in the US.
Yeah.
If we're going to put something like this in place, maybe we should have those capabilities domestically first. I don't know. I'm just a sysadmin. I'm
There's a
just a
lot
guy.
of I have a lot of concerns too, and I think you and I would probably agree the entire audience like, "Yep, yep, yep, yep." I don't think we did.
Yeah, I probably don't need to hash it out. So anyway, agreed. I'm going to keep an eye on this one because it's of personal interest for me. So anyway, what's your news item for the week, Eric?
I had one all set up that I was like, "Oh, that's so cool," and then another one literally just jumped up in my face, so I'm just gonna steal the show and do them both.
All right.
Number 1, they have figured out how to 3D print, circuitry. So, the trick with that has been, let me just bypass the trick part of it and get to the cool thing. What they can do is in a 3D printer, they can use microwaves to manipulate components underneath the outer shell of whatever it is you're printing. So you can use multiple materials at once and it can work them differently. So basically it comes down to, I assume it's going to hit commercial 3D printers before it hits consumer 3D printers, but
Right.
we will eventually be able to print our own printed circuit boards using a 3D printer in the not too distant future. And right now, they say the granularity of it is to the width of a human hair. So if you remember, like we were talking about the enshittification problem that is spread through all the industries now, and
Yep.
everything we buy is crap, and you rent it, you don't buy it. And I'm like, at some point, somebody's gonna say, "This is enough. I've had
Here
it.
we go.
I'm gonna go make my own little company here, and I may not be selling like, I may not have all the bells and whistles and things of the big guys, but you own it and it's made well. And this is the kind of thing that can start that." And I'm really excited about this. And it's funny because I was talking in person with somebody, and I kind of brought up how I think that's how that's going to go. And they started naming like, okay, so this little company here is competing with this giant company on basically the exact same thing that I had said, that we don't have all the bells and whistles, but it's yours and it's high quality.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's here. Here we go. We're going to start to push that pendulum back from the extreme of you own nothing, you'll like it, and it's all trash. So I'm so excited. That's my first one. And the second one, Tim Cook is stepping down.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. That's news to me.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's why I wanted to jump on that right away. Like, oh, that's brand, that's hot, hot, hot. He's
Wow.
stepping down.
Interesting. I
Yeah,
wonder why. Is he
I
just
don't yeah, I didn't really read into it, and I've always been really ambivalent about Tim Cook. That some things, some ways, he's one of the least garbage CEOs that we hear about, but he's also still kind of a garbage human. So,
I
but I don't know anything about his replacement. I don't know if he's better or worse. I just don't know. So, but that was
yeah,
really like, oh, huh, didn't see
yeah,
that one
that's
coming.
interesting. Because I have to imagine at some point you've been in the workplace long, even if you're a CEO, you've been in the workplace long enough to where that beach in Tahiti with a whiskey in your hand starts to sound pretty good after a while, you know?
Yeah,
I
I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah, no idea. So, okay. And I mean, I can't imagine he's being pushed out. I mean, whatever
Can't
my
imagine.
personal feelings are toward Apple, it is a successful company by
Yeah,
all reasonable metrics. So, I mean, wildly successful. I kind of actually undersold it. They're from an investor perspective, Apple's usually a pretty solid bet, and
yeah, for
that's
sure.
what
I
the
do know
board of directors cares about. So,
they've taken some flack in recent days for a perceived lack of innovation, and I mean, we could make the argument that the iPhone is largely the same as it's been for years, but
yeah, but Apple has always had this air of innovation, but they've never innovated anything. They're
right,
never first on anything. They
yep,
always sit back, see what's going to stick, see how they can, massage it into the Apple mold, and then they release it. And somehow some people are like, well, yeah, they did first. I don't know where you're getting
yep,
that from because they have never been innovators. It's just
yeah,
not what they do. And
yeah.
you know, as much as I really kind of despise Apple through and through, I can still point to a lot of good things about them that are top notch and some of the best in the business. But innovation has not never been one of them.
I mean, I
So
always chose them for. I mean, their stuff is solid, you know, solid, and any issues I've run into, have been very few and far between. And I have run into issues. I have had a couple of issues over the last couple of years. Not major, but by and large, the phones especially rock solid. I'm not knocking Android. My problem with Android is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness, right? Android straight from Google is different than Android from Samsung, which is different from Android from LG. I mean, that's the open source nature of Android. The last time I used Android was, oh man, version 4, I think. It's been a minute. Um,
yeah,
and that was an era where I just got sick and tired of having to fight with my phone's operating system. I wanted to tap an app and it just work. And you know what? iPhone delivers on that. That's always been one of my preferences. So I used to do the Android thing and run custom OSs and all that type of stuff on a spare devices and not my I know
I no, I'm
on
not. I'm
spare
not knocking the
devices
fact that you did it. What I'm
on spare
saying, what
devices.
what I'm knocking, Andy, is what I'm hearing you say is you took your perfectly functional tricycle and tried to make it into a four wheeler, and then it didn't work right. Now you're mad.
On spare devices. On spare devices, I ran the custom
Oh,
OSs.
okay, okay,
See?
all right.
I think the
Uh-huh.
last Android I had was an LG. An LG. And
So I
I
had
was
the
still
Samsung, the very first Edge, and then after that, I got an iPhone, and then I just went back to Samsung a couple months ago, and it's a lot wildly different. Some good, some bad. Yeah,
and the last time you know, back then I was still in a role where I would occasionally have to sit in front of end users and do support, and this particular setting on Samsung's version was over here, but on LG's version it was over here. On vanilla, Android it was over here, and it just pet peeve. So, like I said, it's both that platform's greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness too, in my opinion. So, anyway, that's probably a whole episode all by itself. Apple's walled
easily,
garden versus the flexibility of Android, right? So that's
easily,
like
yeah.
Battle of the Titans right there. So anyway, um, so moving on to our nerd hour segment, I'm going to keep mine short because of everything else I've had going on. I've had little time for my own personal nerd hour stuff, and this part of the show is the segment of the show where my co-host and I talk about the geeky, nerdy things that we've been doing in our spare time. It doesn't take an hour, but we call it nerd hour anyway. So, what I've had going on is per our last episode of the show, I have been tinkering a lot with Claude Code lately, and Claude Code, like I said, I've been very impressed with it. Um, One little thing that has to do with the production of this show and the associated newsletter that has been a thorn in my side for a little while now. First off, I love making the show. This is not, I am not complaining about the show, but one struggle I've had is when we come up with a topic idea, either for the newsletter or for a podcast episode, the question always comes up is like, have we covered this thing before? Or if we did, how did we cover it? What angle did we take with it, right? Because we don't want to repeat content unless there's a reason to repeat content, right? Maybe something major changed in a given technology or whatever. Well, in my infinite wisdom, I didn't have a master, here's all the stuff we've talked about list. I didn't create one, right? And yeah, I could go look at the podcast list and get a general idea based on the titles, but the actual specific topics covered are within the show notes of each episode, right? And I didn't want to go out to 43 different episodes and pull show notes. Well, you know what? I got Claude Code to do it, and I got it to do it for all 43 episodes, as well as every single copy of the newsletter. And it curated a markdown file for me with a detailed list of all the topics we covered and the way that we've covered them. And now with Claude Code, I open it inside of my SysAdmin weekly environment and I say, Claude, have we covered Hyper-V clustering before? No, you haven't. You did mention it, as a supporting topic in episode 4 or whatever, right? I don't know if that's the one. It was one of them, but it's just a nice, tiny little nice to have quality of life improvement, and it works amazingly well. So that's my nerd hour thing for the episode. What about you, Eric?
Well, mine is kind of related to your news bit in that I'm starting, excuse me, to research uh, home. I want to have my own customized routing and Pi-hole and all that kind of stuff, and just get a
Oh yeah.
couple of hardware devices that if I'm out and I'm away and I don't want my wife to have to learn how to be me in order to like get the internet back up if something goes sideways. So yeah, I've been kind of playing around with that, and love to tell you what I found, but silly me, I closed the tabs and I'm not doing well, but that's all right. That's all right. It's never terrible to, do a little bit more research, so
Ubiquity UDM Pro with
no.
split
Mm-mm,
networks.
mm-mm.
Mm.
Thank you, but no.
You wound me, Eric. I
I know,
I
but Ubiquity
I
started it, so
I ride the Ubiquity bandwagon pretty hard. I'll
I
leave
got a
it at
couple
that.
of Ubiquity Wi-Fi things in my drawer here unplugged that are like emergency if I really have to. After I go through all the other things, if I really have to, maybe I'll just send them to you and you can. Yeah,
How did Ubiquity hurt you, Eric? Like,
it was like I spent
I'm just
more on it than
playing.
I did a Linksys, and it was just as unreliable. So
Uh,
okay,
I've been very happy with my UDM Pro actually. And the
yeah,
the
I've
two
heard
apps I have.
their higher pro or more pro level stuff is better, but I tried to go for the high end of the consumer
Yeah,
stuff at that
I've
time
never
because it
touched the
was the same
consumer
deal. It's
gear.
like I need something that the other people in my house can just unplug
Yep.
if they need to do something. And it turned out like we were doing that like every week. And I'm like, okay, well, this isn't any better than the stuff I had. So, and I spent more on it.
I will say I don't ever have to I never have to really reboot my UDM Pro. I go, man, I don't remember the last time I had to manually do something with it. And the way I have it set up is I actually have 3 networks defined on it. One is like uh, all of my stuff, my servers and like all the stuff I do for all the tech stuff I do. I have
Yeah,
another network that is specifically for all of the smart home stuff, like my Philips light bulbs and all that stuff. They're on their own
right,
isolated network. And then the third network is just like, you know, basic, non-Andy house stuff. To your
right,
point, Eric, like, it's a super flat, simplified network. If one of my Pi holes goes offline, nobody has to figure out how to fix that while Andy is away, So We'll have to do we've done home lab episodes before, but we'll have to do another one. So
Maybe I'll just crib some of your notes, but I'm not. What I want to do is do because I found a few that like basically they sell you a mini PC, but the router portion is separate, so you can still do like virtual machines and things. So then I
yep,
could do Pi-hole and all that stuff, and just have one box. I'm like, oh, the internet's messed up, and then there will be two of them, and well, hopefully it just fails over, and if they don't, well, then we'll reset both. So
interesting.
that
I
that
have
that's what I'm
ideas.
after. Probably going to overdo it, but that's fine. I love to over engineer things.
I have ideas. We'll have to take that offline or do another episode, but we'll talk.
All right.
So, with that, I do have one comment I want to make sure I cover on the show because, if we love comments here at SysAdmin Weekly. If you watch on YouTube, you can leave comments there. If you watch or listen, I should say, on Spotify, you can leave comments there. And I love to read comments on the show when I get a chance. So, I actually have two comments here. One of which you responded to, Eric. This was in regards to episode 42. Should sysadmins job hop or stay put? What about secret option C? And basically, in this episode, we talked about how the different kind of career paths, methods that sysadmins can take, whether they should job hop frequently or they should stay in one location. This particular commenter said, just found your channel. Really like your long form, laid back conversations. Thank you. Appreciate that. Gone from help desk to principal engineer over a 12-year career, and a lot of that came from job hopping. That said, there comes a point where job hopping starts to plateau and you get diminishing returns. It's great for getting raises, keeping up with market compensation, moving between roles like sysadmin to cloud engineer to DevOps, DevOps to SRE, all the things that I did. At some point, if you want to make it to director, VP, or executive level role, you probably won't be able to job hop your way there. Exec roles tend to look for people with tenure in their current role and want to perform or want proof that somebody can stay, build, invest in a firm, and create the kind of lasting impact those positions require. Anyways, love the channel. So appreciate the kind words, first off. Two, completely agree with this because, yeah, I have seen it in my own the places that I've worked throughout my career that typically those people that get the promotion into those exec level roles, yeah, they've been around for a while. And I think we even said in that episode, Eric, where when you're younger in your career, it probably makes sense to job hop more frequently until you've found your forever home, right? Where you kind of want to put your roots down and hang out professionally for a while. And maybe that's the organization that you end up trying to get into management for. But you wanted to talk about how, if you're one of those people that really, really likes to press buttons and deploy new technology, think really heavily about moving up into a management role. I don't know if you want to expand on any of that before we move on to the next one, but I'm summarizing your comments. So not trying to take
Yeah,
words out of your mouth, but that's kind of
you're
what you
not.
mentioned.
You're not. I think we've talked about this in the past. The big thing I would push on all of this is, first of all, if you like tech, being a tech manager means you're going to do less tech. And the further up you go, the less hands-on you're going to have. And if you're in that for 2 or 3 years, you're going to suddenly realize there are people beneath you who are better at it than you are. Not necessarily smarter or more experienced, but the tech moves fast and you will lose your place in the industry. And it's just how it works. And so nothing wrong with going up into management. You need to understand that is the end game.
Yeah.
You will move away from tech as you do that. And the other thing that I cannot stress this enough, that it's like we never learn as a species. We never learn. Just because you're good at a thing doesn't mean that you're going to be good managing people doing that thing. And
Right.
I want to say this hits really hard too, because a lot of managers are like myself. They have MBAs, and I will tell you, in the MBA course, it is about managing a business. It is not about managing people, and those are two different things. So somebody who's got an MBA is not necessarily a good people manager, and they're not trained to be a good people manager in the MBA course
Right.
work, right? So there's a whole lot of things that go into being an effective people manager that have nothing to do with tech and nothing to do with MBAs and a lot of the things that people encounter in their managers, I guess, is what I'm looking after.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's fine if you want to be a manager, but you got to understand that it's unless you've already kind of got your feet wet and doing it, it is not necessarily the brochure and the reality don't necessarily line up very well. So
Right.
just a little word of warning is I've known more than a few people in my life who have gotten themselves demoted intentionally so they could get back into the tech stuff
Right.
because they
I
missed
have
it.
heard of that. That's more common than people realize.
Yeah, because money is great, but eventually you're like, yeah, but also being sane and doing things that I don't hate myself for is also important. So
That too. Yes, there's something to be said for that. So, well, I had another one I was going to cover, but for the sake of time, I think we're going to move on to our regularly scheduled programming. And as a reminder, today we are talking about Hyper-V failover clustering, and specifically in 2026, right? And so, what I wanted to start with here is we're kind of expanding on what we talked about in last week's episode, and I'll link to that in the show notes, folks, in case you want to take a look at it, or just hit back on your podcast player, right? But that question of like, okay, I've decided to run Hyper-V in my local environment. Is it still worth it in 2026? I mean, yeah, there's things like Azure Local, and or maybe I can do cloud native alternatives. And you know, I I can speak to the cloud native alternatives first. First off, AWS, Azure, Google Compute all offer a fantastic litany of different solutions, right? I'm not vilifying cloud, but as some of our previous episodes have kind of shined a light on, there does seem to be a concerted effort to make people rely more on subscription services and less on your own stuff on prem that you run yourself. And so we did a whole episode, you, Paul, and I, Eric, on that one. That's we discussed that at length. I'll put that in the show notes, folks, too, so you can check that out. But um, Azure Local, I think, is probably the one I run into questions the most about. Is like, okay, well, if I have Azure Local, why would I run a standard Hyper-V failover cluster as opposed to Azure Local? And to me, this is more of a billing thing, personally, because uh, your management is going to be mostly the same if you use, Windows Admin Center. Um, but I think the billing component is the larger thing. If you're running Azure Local, you are running the billing for it completely through your Azure billing ecosystem. Whereas failover cluster, a Hyper-V failover cluster, you're going to go buy your Windows Server licenses. You're going to pay once, typically, and you're going to just run it, deploy it, and you're done. Um, to me, that's the big difference between those two. Why I would choose one over the other. I don't know if there's anything on top of that you want to add, Eric?
the thing with cloud services versus on-prem, when you're making that decision, like I can do either. Um, when you're doing it on-prem, there's a thing of, all right, I gotta budget it out, kind of how much am I going to spend? What's that going to be? You get your
Yep.
number together and then you go in front of a boss or a purchasing board or something, hat in hand, like, may I please have some money to buy this? And they do their thing, and it's a yes or no, and you get your money, you buy it, and off you go. When you switch to cloud-based stuff like this, now there's probably gonna it's if it hasn't happened in your org already, it probably will, where there's gonna be like a governance group who sits around like, what are we spending our money on every month? And see, so there's no longer this one-shot deal where you go in, get it done, and then you don't talk to those folks again for 3 years. There's now going to be this bureaucratic layer that's ever present. And you're going to add
True.
politics into your tech in a way that may be good, depending on your org, or it may be absolutely horrible. So keep that kind of as there's going to be that ongoing thing you constantly have to deal with if you choose to go with a subscription based product like Azure Local.
Yeah. Very true. Because it's hard enough having that discussion once every 3 years or whenever you do a hardware refresh, right? But I have seen that from the MSP angle where, like, okay, let's review our Azure spend for the month of March, right? And like, oh, you had an increase of 20%. Why is that? Oh, you asked to spin up this service and this service. Well, oh, but wait, we're not using that. And so you're having that billing headache discussion every month.
Yeah.
Where
And then in the
I'm
subscription portal, then because you're accustomed as an
yep,
admin to be like, I bought it, I own it, I'm in charge of it top to bottom. Well, now you may not be the person who goes in there as what do you call it, a tenant, like the owner. You
yep,
may be
yep.
now degraded to some like, well, you're kind of an admin, but not exactly, sort of a thing. So that you're giving up control that to put that bureaucratic layer in, which
Yeah,
depending on your org and how things go and your culture and everything, maybe that's not a big deal. But in some places, that's really
it,
terrible.
it can be. Yep, for
Because
sure. The other thing on my list here, I wanted to make sure I called out. I called it air gapped in the requirements. You and I have had conversations about air gapping before, Eric. I think what I meant by this in my notes is there are some organizations that cannot depend on distributed cloud ecosystems for a given workload. They need it to be on-prem for 100% controlled reliability. They are in charge of it from end to end. Or they have some compliance mandate that says it has to be on-prem, or latency is a concern. You can probably speak to that as working where you do, but I know a lot of organizations like that.
yeah, I fortunately I think they're disappearing in a lot of ways because it's just not practical like it was in like the DOS days or whatever. But
Right.
over time, I think air gapping has become an impossibility to do.
Oh yeah.
And because it's impossible, a lot of people who will swear up and down that they're air gapped, and then you go in there and spend about 3 minutes and go, nope, here's an outbound connection. Oh, that doesn't
Wait,
count.
port
It
22 is
absolutely
open?
counts.
What?
Yeah, it absolutely counts. So
What about 3389? Yeah, we can open
yeah,
3389, right? Yeah,
yeah, that's
why
fine.
not?
It's still air gapped. It's still air gapped.
We have to manage the thing. Oh
Yeah.
man, yeah,
I mean,
I
well,
know.
you have to go through this network to that network to that network, and then you can 33. So it's still air gapped. Like, no, no, that's not what air gapping is.
Open ports are open ports. Full
Yeah,
stop.
they're open. Well, I can
Yep.
only get in through my lights out board. Still not air gapped.
Yep. Yeah, you and I we've had that discussion many times. Yep.
Hmm.
That's anyway. So yeah, I think we covered the why it's still relevant in 2026. And let's get into some prerequisites in architecture, right? Things that you actually need before starting, right? So we talked about the requirements for Hyper-V last week. Again, check out last week's episode if you haven't had a chance to look at that. But clustering has some real requirements around it too, right? I mean, you need a dedicated heartbeat NIC, which you can share it with other functions. If you're planning to use RDMA, there's some considerations around that. You need to figure out
What
some sort of.
dedicated heartbeat neck? I have not done that in over a decade.
Well, I know neither have I. But people always ask that question. I always just
Oh,
take.
that's the okay. Okay. I had
Yep,
somebody
I
come
get
in.
that.
Well, I got to put in this heartbeat neck. I'm like, no. What are you
It
looking
just
at? They
does it
showed me this doc that
automatically.
Microsoft still has published and still hasn't marked it as we're not, they put that thing, we're not keeping this updated anymore. They haven't put that banner on it yet. So people, it says you got to have a heartbeat neck. Like, no, 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 that is, stop reading that doc,
Yeah.
folks. It's 25 years old or 15 years old and it's wrong now. So continue. Sorry, I did
It'd
not
be
mean to.
nice if they updated that page with like, this is taken care of automatically as part of setup. But if you want to change it or tinker with it, here's how, right?
I don't think you can make a genuine heartbeat network anymore. I don't think it can be done. And if it can, it would take so much effort to why that would be the huge question. What do you think you're getting out of this?
Yeah,
Because you're not.
exactly.
You're getting absolutely nothing out of it. So don't do that. Anyway,
Yep.
continue.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. You need to have some sort of shared storage, whether you're going to use storage spaces direct, which is local disks that are aggregated across multiple chassis, right? You can go that route, or you can go your more traditional separated shared storage like an SMB share, iSCSI targets, fiber channel. Personally, my favorite of those three, because I have the most experience with it, is iSCSI. I've always been a big iSCSI guy. That said, I have had a lot of good luck with the SMB3 stuff over the last couple of years. It worked very well. I guess the iSCSI stuff that's probably the gray hair in my beard showing. I don't know. I just love a good iSCSI network, right? So, um, fiber channel. I have less experience with. I think I've run one cluster ever that had fiber channel in it, and Yeah, it works fine. It's just not my preferred method because, like I said, I haven't done a whole lot with it. Anyway, those are things you have to consider. There's an Active Directory integration that trips up a lot of people coming over from the VMware world. Um, you know, I and you can set up work group clusters where the nodes in the cluster are just inside of a work group. You and I, Eric, actually did a whole episode around whether Hyper-V should be domain joined or not. So instead of rehashing that whole argument here today, I'm going to link that particular episode in the show notes. I don't think anything has changed really since we had that conversation. I want to say it was probably 6, 7, 8 months ago now, but nothing's changed there really to my knowledge. Anything on your end?
I haven't seen anything new, and I still have exactly the same thing I've been saying pretty much since the beginning is no. It's no. Put in the domain, be done with it.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed.
And
Um,
all your
but
arguments are stop, knock it off.
yep. I bring it up because, again, we're talking about failover clustering requirements, and typically you want it to be part of the domain, right? So, anyway, Windows Server 2025, being the most recent version of Windows Server, it does tighten some of the defaults, mainly around the SMB security stuff. There's a whole article about, what's new with Hyper-V in 2025 that includes mention of the enhanced security stuff. I will include a link to that so you can go and check out that stuff. So, but other than that, um, you know, requirements in terms of clustering are pretty akin to what we've known as clustering for many years, right? Um, we need storage, you need networking, you need compute. Done. Um, Quorum, I think, is the big one for this episode, and the big thing that tends to trip up a lot of people in terms of failover clustering in Hyper-V. Anything you want to talk about before regarding prerequisites or architecture before we get into the quorum discussion, Eric?
No, I think you did a really good job covering it all. So let's plow on, man.
So quorum, right? So when we think about a cluster, let's assume we have a 2-node cluster right now, right? If one of the 2 nodes goes offline, how does the remaining node understand and know whether that the clustered services are still healthy or not?
So let's throw in a term here, and it's called split brain.
Yep.
And this is what happens when you're running anything in any kind of clustering style of terminology. It's not limited to clustering, in which 2 entities might take ownership of a resource, and if it's not brokered well, they might both take ownership at the exact same time, run the same thing, 2 different places, accepting changes from 2 different directions and not able to synchronize how those changes land. So in this case, it would be what happens if 2 different nodes try to spin up the same virtual machine at the same time. So that would be a split brain scenario for Hyper-V.
Yep.
So when we talk about Quorum, Quorum is specifically designed to make that effectively impossible.
Yep.
So that's what
Yep.
Quorum is for. That's why we have it. So I don't do a lot, I guess, but let's say you've got 2 different data centers connected by a really high speed network, but it is possible for one data center to go dark and the other one to stay hot. And that would be like your 2-node setup, like you're talking about. One of them, but it doesn't go dark. It like breaks the network connection between. What happens? How do you decide how to deal with that kind of a problem where both of the nodes are actually up physically and running? What happens?
Yep.
How do you deal with the virtual machines? What do you do? This is really where Quorum, I think, is going to jump in and make sure things don't turn catastrophic. But you can also keep your services online, because the obvious thing to do would be, we'll shut them both down. Okay, cool. But then now your service is offline when it may not need to be.
And you have end users yelling that they can't get things done because your services are offline, right? Um, and so, let's stick with the 2-node scenario right now. We got 2 Hyper-V nodes. Typically, the way that quorum is handled in these situations with a 2-node cluster is you have something like a disk witness, where you have some disk, you have a share configured somewhere that the cluster uses as an extra check against the cluster, right? It's an extra vote in whether the cluster is online, the clustered services are online or not. The disk witness is, I think, the file share witness is what I just described, not a disk witness. But I think that's the configuration I've done the most frequently, and I have seen administrators who will spin up a file server VM on one of the two nodes, carve off a share, and use that as the file share quorum, and doesn't work because it's not a fully independent item, right? Typically, you want this to exist on storage.
I mean, I guess it could work, but it's probably not going to work the way you expect.
You could potentially run into a...
Oh, wow. I've not seen anyone try that.
I've seen it. I've run into it a couple of times over...
Really?
Yeah. It doesn't happen often, but I have seen it. Now, the way that I always configured it, so I worked for an MSP for a long time, and we had a lot of small 2-node cluster deployments all over the place. But we always had a small NAS on-prem at each site that we used for a variety of things, right? As a repository for our own tooling, or maybe some temporary backup storage, like a file server project's happening, whatever. It was there for us to use. I was always just carve off a file share witness on that thing to act as, the third quorum member in a 2-node cluster, because it was fully independent of the cluster, accessible over TCP/IP, and it effectively worked as that third vote in the cluster. The other more modern method that I've seen a lot of people use over the last couple of years is Cloud Witness, right? So you configure a Cloud Witness in Azure, and it acts as that third vote in the 2-node cluster, right? I think I covered most of that, Eric. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
There's a couple of outliers. One is to run without quorum, without without an independent vote, which is fine in odd clusters with an odd number of nodes. That's what I'm going for.
Yep.
It's okay. It's and we'll come back to why we don't usually do that anymore. We almost always configure quorum even in odd sized clusters. Then the other option, I hope no one is doing this anymore, but you can actually go in, and what is that called? This goes back to the original failover clustering, in which I forget the name of it, but I think like you set up a disk as your quorum, and if that disk disappears, the whole cluster shuts down, I think is how that worked.
Yep.
I had to kind of dig into it. It's still an option, whatever that was. It's like, okay. And Microsoft was always like, please no.
That was like the 08 R2 method of doing things, if I remember right.
I think it's before that. I think it's 08. Like it stopped in 08. I think it was like from 03.
I've been leaning on the share witness for so long. My brain's blocked out anything else.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I've been doing the disk witness. So I mostly work with fiber, and before that I had dedicated iSCSI devices. Yeah. So always a SAN, I guess. So similar. I mean, at the end of the day, the difference between the witness mode and the disk mode is very small. It's kind of like, what have I got laying around here? Pick the thing that works the best. And so on a SAN, you can go in and set up a tiny little disk, a little LUN, and if your SAN is smart enough, it does dedupe, so you get the thing down to like it's consuming like 20 megs of disk space, and nobody really cares about it. So it's trivial to set it up, trivial to get it all connected in. So I've been doing disk witness forever. So, but it's really along the same line of what you're talking about with a share witness. It's just a line instead of a share. So
yeah, exactly. So I mean, multiple different ways of handling that requirement depending on the hardware, the network, and the storage that you have available for your given configuration, right? And I think that handles a large chunk of requirements across the entire spectrum of use cases. I think if I was going to choose...
I have personally avoided the cloud witness specifically for the stretch cluster kind of thing. What if both data centers have lost their connection to each other, but both of them can see the cloud witness?
Yep.
then it still has to make decisions. And like there are
Right.
ways around that, but I feel like the architecture is heavier than it needs to be. I'd rather say, all right, this disk can exist in either data center, but not both. So the one that it lives in, cool, leave that online. And then if I
Yep.
have to, I can go in and go, actually, this is the data center I want it in, and then I can shut that down and do, I have magical ways to deal with that. They aren't all that
Right.
magical, but they're easier in my mind than this cloud witness, which was probably fine, but also, like you were saying before, like there's a little bit of old school in me that like it's like 20 megs on my SAN.
Yeah.
Why string this dependency out to Chicago when I don't have to? So
Yeah. And when I was creating the notes for this particular episode, I did a quick search and I was doing some reading, and I saw a lot of people using Cloud Witness, mentioning using Cloud Witness, and I for most people it's probably the fine choice, but I think I'm a little bit old school with you too, Eric. Is that with my file share witness, I control everything end to end from the nodes to the file share itself, right? I know if the switch connecting the all of them is having issues. With a cloud witness, maybe I don't know that Azure West is having issues at the time,
mhm.
Um
And what happens if like that governance group decides they don't like me anymore and they're going to turn off my access to the Azure files?
yep.
And then now my witness is down and I don't really understand why.
Or the card that accounting has on file with Microsoft expires, somebody forgets to update it, and oh, oops.
Yeah.
You know. Now,
Nope.
granted,
My
there's a lot of
cluster
stuff
shouldn't
that
be
would.
down as a result of it, but it's sick and now it's something I have to deal with.
Right,
When I
exactly.
could have just carved up a 20 meg LUN on my SAN and not done that.
Right,
So yeah, I don't like
exactly.
adding points of complexity to things if I don't
Yep.
without a clear benefit, and the benefit of the Azure file was not very clear to me. It doesn't cost anything because the storage is so small. It's not going to add to your spend, so that's not the problem.
Right.
But it's another thing to deal with, and
Yep.
well, why?
So we've talked about storage, talked about quorum. The one thing I didn't put on my list here is just general. How do how do you establish a failover cluster? And surprise, you'll use failover cluster manager, or you can do it through Windows Admin Center too, can't you, Eric? I,
Well,
I
if you can, then you're a better person than I am because I actually had a project of documenting creating a failover cluster in Windows Admin Center, and after 3 days of it fighting with it, I just gave up. So it's got a tool in it that lets you do it, but I never could get it to work. And this was on a clean, brand new, freshly built, wiped domain, wiped hardware. It was all fresh, like all Microsoft top to bottom, no third party stuff, no fancy stuff, no nothing. And I just could not get it to do it. And I gave up. That was actually, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, I kind of came to a point where I'm just done with Windows Admin Center as a rule. And this was the straw. Like,
right.
nope. Nope. So there is a tool there to create one, and I guess in theory it works. And maybe by now somebody at Microsoft has fixed it. I don't know, but I always now do it in PowerShell
Yeah.
because it's just quicker than all the other things, and it works every time.
And it's more verbose as well too, I found. That's the one thing I like about PowerShell. I mean, it will tell you generally. I put generally in front of this. It will generally tell you what's wrong.
It generally will.
You know,
And like one thing I've run into with the failover cluster manager, it works 98% of the time, I would say. But
yes.
sometimes it'll go in and say this node that you just formatted it, you just added it to the domain, brand new, but it's already in a cluster. What?
Wait a
Happens to
second.
me all the time. So then I go out to PowerShell and I run clear cluster node on it. So after a while, I'm like, I'm going to be in PowerShell to clear these cluster nodes that shouldn't need it anyway. So why don't I just type in new cluster? It's only like three. It doesn't take long. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it works pretty well. Um, I think the other thing that kind of hoses people up a little bit when they're establishing a failover cluster for the first time is VMware. It's very streamlined when you define a new cluster, right? Here are the nodes I want to use. Bing, bang, boom. Everything's generally, you know, kind of streamlined for you. In Hyper-V, it's a little bit more of a two-step process. Once you have, your hardware configured, you go through the wizard first of establishing a failover cluster using the nodes that you've defined. I have seen people that go and create the cluster, but then they don't take the step to go and select which virtual machines need to be a clustered
Hmm.
role. And
Right.
so I, it's been a while since I've established a new cluster. I don't think anything has changed in this particular step, but
No.
this is so
There are
after
more tools to start a virtual machine as clustered now, but the
right.
process, you can still go into Hyper-V Manager or PowerShell, create a VM, and then it's never clustered. That is
Right.
that's absolutely a thing you could do.
Yep, correct. So for those people that are coming over from the VMware world, after you've established the failover cluster, you still have to go through a wizard and failover cluster manager to add a I forget the exact terminology, a clustered role to the cluster, and you have to select the virtual machine role type, select the VMs you want to be basically HA enabled, to use VMware terminology. And then that adds them as a cluster role inside of Hyper-V, or sorry, inside of failover cluster manager. So I find that throws a lot of people off as well too. So
Right. Yeah, that and we've had more than one complaint about the management story when it comes to Hyper-V. So for the folks coming over from VMware, remember that vSphere was always designed as a product,
yep,
right? Uh, Microsoft views all that differently. They see, well, we have virtual machines in Hyper-V, that's a product, and then we have failover clusters, which is a product, and they're separate products with a lot of heavy integration between the two of them. It is not and has never been a unified stack the way that vSphere has. So that's why.
yep,
Not
yep,
that I'm saying it's a wonderful experience for you, but there is a reason that it evolved that way. So
correct.
it's not just specifically they did something stupid or whatever. It's different teams at Microsoft that do
Yep.
these things, so on and so forth. It is not a unified product the way that vSphere is.
You and
So
I,
there you
you
are.
you and I did a whole episode specifically on the management story of Hyper-V. So I'm going to link that in the show notes, folks, as well, so you can take a look at that. But yeah, there's a lot of nuance there, a lot of different
Yeah.
ways to manage a Hyper-V cluster for sure.
Yes. So, and a lot, and of course, I could go on all day about notes. Clustering is a big deal. I do want to say, like the quorum and all that stuff can be. I mean, if you're coming from VMware, I don't think the end product is so radically different that I would need to spend a lot of time. It's more for folks coming into it new.
Yeah.
Um, with Microsoft clustering, every node decides for itself whether it's going to be in the cluster or not. The cluster doesn't get together and like, well, we're going to kick Shelly out because she didn't wear the right clothes today. That's not how that works. It is the node says, I'm in this size cluster with this many votes, and therefore the number of votes I would need to maintain a quorum, which is just like in I think a lot of us see it in politics, especially. So we have a large group of people, say 400 representatives, and if we don't have at least like 302, then we don't have a quorum, and that means we can't meet, we can't make decisions. We don't have enough people here to establish a clear majority.
Yep.
Basically, is the concept behind quorum. So the node in your two node example would say, well, me sitting here, node number one, I can see the node, other node, and I can see the witness. So 3 out of 3 are up. That's a quorum.
Yep.
Or I can see the witness, but not the other node. So from my perspective, that's 2 out of 3. That's also a quorum. Or I can't see either of the other two. It's just me. I am going to shut down.
Yeah.
That's how that works. That's how quorum, and that's like the long and the short description of how it does quorum. So then, what'll happen is the other ones then via the parts that they can see, like usually that shared storage, they go, okay, well that resource, we know the node is gone, and they'll log something in their logs that says node two has exited, it's gone, right? And they'll keep an eye on its resources, and as soon as they can take ownership, they'll decide between them which surviving node takes it, and then they'll spin that up is how those work.
Right.
So um, we didn't yet talk about the dynamic quorum, in which when you gracefully shut something down, it will set its vote to 0 so that it no
Yep.
longer counts. So your cluster can dynamically shrink in size by gracefully shutting down nodes. If they just disappear, their vote counts. But if you go in and go start shutdown, it'll tell all the other nodes, hey guys, I'm shutting down. Okay. And they'll say, okay, well, we're going to reclaim your vote. So your cluster may go from a 3 node to a 2 node or 2 votes. We call them votes because every node gets a vote and then the quorum witness gets a vote. So we'll just delete your vote. And so the total number gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And the idea is if your cluster is like gracefully getting smaller, even though you're technically not above the full majority, the whole cluster doesn't necessarily need to shut down. So
Right.
let's say you could gracefully shut down 2 nodes in a 4 node cluster that don't even have a witness, and they'll figure it out. They'll make it work. So dynamic quorum is kind of cool.
Well, it also enables scenarios like, patching and replacing hardware and things like that, right?
Yep. A lot
So,
of different things it is, and so you don't have to sit around and go, all right, how many? And it's not as useful on a 2 node cluster clearly, but
right.
as you get into some larger ones, you don't necessarily need to, as the administrator, sit around and go, okay, what do I need to do to maintain the quorum to keep the machines up, right?
Yeah. You can just go about your business and do the thing you have to do, So,
Yep. And like dynamic memory will say, all right, let me squeeze these VMs down as much as I can to fit them into the smaller number of nodes. And so you might be able to get away with dropping 4 out of a 6 node cluster and still continue providing services. And,
uh,
obviously, hopefully not something you want to do on a regular basis, but in a pinch, it's kind of nice to say, well, at least I don't have to go around and do a bunch of work to force this cluster to stay online when it has the resources to do what I need it to do, but technically doesn't have quorum. Dynamic quorum can save you from that.
you think about all the things that are happening under the hood when something like that happens. We had that episode where we talked about abstraction in modern IT. Think about everything that's going on under the hood when you remove a node from a cluster or pause a node, I should say, right? Like there's so much that happens under the hood. We should have our friend Ben Armstrong on, and we should go through everything that happens when you go through that process. Just as a it'd be a fun episode, in my opinion. So anyway, so a couple other items that I have slated for this particular episode. After you've established your failover cluster, I think the big thing that a lot of people see the allure of a cluster for is live migration and storage migration. Again, for those folks coming from the VMware world, vMotion and storage vMotion. So that has always been one of the big draws of virtualization, right? Like, wait, I don't have to take everything offline to patch things. I can just move VMs around and patch the host and, do my thing. Yeah. Live migration definitely is a headline feature because of that. And this is another area where I am readily on the side of making sure that your nodes are part of an Active Directory domain, because um, you typically don't run into permission issues. Typically, don't run into permission issues in moving virtual machines around. Um, I think two things that you'll hear a lot about are Kerberos constrained delegation or CRED SSP in regards to doing live migrations. And a lot of this has to do with the security model that is used in a cluster, in that whether nodes are allowed to move VMs amongst themselves, right? Um, I was thinking, Eric, that we would spend some time on constrained delegation and CRED SSP, but I'm starting to wonder if we should do a whole episode on Hyper-V security,
Or
right?
even on CRED SSP versus
You
Kerberos.
could, yeah, you could spend a whole
Because
episode
there's a whole
just
lot
on
there
that.
that, yeah, there's a lot there, and it goes way beyond Hyper-V. I didn't
I,
run into constrained delegation until Hyper-V, but then when I discovered it, I'm like, wow, there's other things I could be doing with this, and I wish I had the
yep.
time to explore it further. So
Maybe we'll come back to that one, because we could go on for another 20, 30 minutes on just
easy,
that.
easy.
So, um, storage migration, and nothing crazy there. I mean, same thing as with the storage vMotion. Moving a VHDX file from one location to the other while the virtual machine stays online. I think the big thing for me that has really helped me out in terms of virtual machine movement over the last 5-10 years is shared nothing live migration. Used to be you had to have a um, you had to have a some sort of shared storage location for the VM to live in order to move it from host to host. Well, there have been many situations over the years where um, f- we had to provision a new server for a customer and then run that virtual machine inside of our data center temporarily while the customer started utilizing it, but ultimately they wanted it to run in their data center. So no shared storage or networking fabric associated with that, but as long as we could talk from host to host temporarily, we could do a shared nothing live migration, and that the virtual machine stays up even though it is moving between disparate hosts and disparate storage as well too. You know, I don't think there's a ton of magic happening under the hood. It's just orchestration, right? But I tell you what, it has saved me a ton of work over the years. Um, so I will always sing praises for shared nothing live migration.
As you
Bec-
should. That was when it came around. It was amazing
It was like
because it
black
had to
magic when
use
it came out.
SMB3.
Yep,
That was one of the showcases of the SMB3 technologies that it enabled that. It was
yep,
basically impossible before that. So
yep.
yeah, it's great. Now it's kind of passe. Everyone's doing it, but
It's because it's one of those things you just take for granted, right? I mean, you start using it,
mhm.
you take it for granted, but yeah, it's an amazing technology. It does a lot for us for sure. Um, so let me check time here. So we're at an hour. I suppose we should probably wrap this thing up. But the other things I had on my list, Eric, were cluster aware updating. Kind of those day two operations, right? Like, okay, you've established your cluster. Where do you go from here? And I almost wonder if that should be its own episode too. Not just the updating piece, but like where okay, you've established your cluster, you move virtual machines onto it. What are some what are the day-to-day management things that you do
Yeah, I
for your
think a
cluster?
good day two episode would be great because
Yeah.
we're, we're we're finally hitting a place where I think a lot of the onboarding stuff for Hyper-V, where there's the materials out there for people who are looking,
Yep.
and always my big, uh, I guess, warning on that one is there's still a lot of 2008 R2 era advice and documents out there which
Oh
are no
yeah.
longer valid, but talked about as though they're valid. And the other piece being vSphere is not Hyper-V and failover clustering. So a lot of the stuff you VMware admins are bringing over is going to hurt you. So sorry, those are the two big things. So, but once you get over that hump, then there's that day two thing. Like, well, now it's running, but now what?
Yeah,
So yeah, there's a lot to do there.
for sure. Yeah, so I think I'll schedule that one as a separate episode as well too. And you know what? I bet you we have enough Hyper-V related episodes. We probably have 6 or 7 Hyper-V related episodes, I would bet. And we cover a pretty
Easily.
large swath of Hyper-V topics. So, if I get ambitious, I may put together a playlist specifically of Hyper-V material that we've done because there's a
I think
lot
you should
now.
do that.
Yeah, I
I
think it's a
think you
good
should
idea.
absolutely do that.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll save the other two episode ideas for their own episode. But other than that, Eric, like I said, I think we're at an hour, so I suppose we should wrap this thing up. It's always good talking to you about Hyper-V, my friend.
I'm going to leave the folks with one more thought because
Sure.
this is something that's been on my notebook to write an article about for a while. But uh, also be very wary of things that you do not need to use failover clustering for. There are
Yeah.
still a lot of use cases and probably a growing number of use cases where don't use a clustered host. Have your VMs do something else for HA. So I'm just going to walk away from there and let y'all think about that a bit.
You know, there is there's a lot to chew on there because there's a lot of services, especially in the modern era, that are inherently designed to withstand failure. And
Mhm.
I'm going to use one of the services on our internal network that we have been using for decades as an example. Active Directory is specifically designed to withstand failure. I mean, we put AD on virtual machines, right, for the benefits of virtual machine mobility and all that stuff. But you know what? Don't have to, because Active Directory has that plan for failure baked right into it. And
Yep.
a lot of modern applications are starting to take they're starting to take that cue from some of those legacy HA first services, I guess I would say. So
Yep. And that's always my poster child for this whole discussion is I virtualize Active Directory every chance I get. I never cluster the virtual machine ever.
yeah,
You get nothing from that.
yep,
Not a single thing. And people are, wait a minute, what about, and cool, let's talk about those things. So that'd be a good thing to get some feedback on is you tell me why you do cluster your AD and I'll explain to you why I don't think that's a good argument.
yeah.
And maybe you change my mind. How about that? Maybe you do change my mind. I'm not going to be closed off and say, no, I know everything. I don't know everything. I know I have dealt with this a lot and I have not yet had anyone explain to me a good reason to cluster an Active Directory virtual machine.
I don't think I have a good reason to. What I've always done is same thing. I never cluster them. If I have a 2-node cluster, I will always set the preferred cluster node for each of the Active Directory virtual machines.
I
That way
won't
they
even
stay
do that.
separated, you know?
I don't even do that.
Ah, okay. Gotcha.
Nope, it runs as a local virtual machine. Failover cluster knows nothing about it. I will not cluster them ever, ever,
Ah,
ever.
okay. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, I've done it both ways. But if it is in the cluster, I always make sure I set the preferred cluster node. That way both Active Directory VMs don't live on the same node together, right? Because that's a recipe for failure too. So anyway, I appreciate the Hyper-V discussion as always, Eric. We will be doing more in the near future, I get the feeling. So appreciate your
Yep.
time as always, my friend.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And those of you watching, hopefully you found some value in today's episode. We love talking about Hyper-V, so hopefully you love hearing about it. Also, would love to know what technologies you are interested in hearing about and what topics you're interested in hearing about. Again, you can always comment on the YouTube versions of the show, the Spotify versions of the show. You can email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com. Additionally, we have our GitHub discussion boards out there available. I put a link to those in the show notes where, we have a couple people posting here and there. I also have a thread going where I'm asking you for your friend and family beer hour support stories, right? The beer money support stories. For example, you go on holiday, like Christmas time, you go home for Christmas and the family has a billion IT support questions for you because you're the IT person in the family, right? So I've heard absolutely hilarious stories as part of this discussion, but I've heard some horrifying ones too. So I'd love to share your stories on the show, and of course, I attribute them to you as well too. But I'd love to share the community stories there. So I'll put a link to that thread in the show notes as well too, folks. So anyway, you can find all the links associated with the show at www.sysadminweekly.com, and also be sure to check out our companion newsletter at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com as well too. Other than that, we'll let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there, and thanks for watching. We'll catch you again next week for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.